They don't come here to attack us because we're rich and we're free. They come and they attack us because we're over there.
We don't need to go populist left or populist right. We don't need to embrace neo-Marxism or neo-fascism, these disastrous movements from the 20th century. Turns out the answer is pretty much our Bill of Rights, our story. Embrace freedom. That's the answer.
And if the LP has a purpose, it's not to put people to sleep. It's to wake them up.
We're here because we love liberty, and we're here because we hate injustice. We are here to save mankind. We are here to fight.
Join us, the Libertarian Party, in perhaps the most exciting, grandest endeavor in history, the restoration of American liberty.
Ideas spread, they can't stop them. An idea whose time has come cannot be stopped by any army or any government.
Hello and welcome to episode 72 of Decentralized Revolution, a podcast from the Libertarian Party Mises Caucus and Mises PAC. I'm Aaron Harris and I'm your host. Guest today is David Sanchez. He's the frontman, singer, guitarist, lyricist for the thrash metal band Havok. And most of you know, if you've listened to this very much, or if you know me personally, that I am not exactly a metal aficionado. I don't quite get hip hop either. I like kind of some metal, but I just haven't been able to get into it to the degree that a lot of Mises Caucus people and other libertarians seem to. But I'm learning and really tempted to check more of it out after talking to David. Really interesting guy. And I don't know if I think he specifically, doesn't have a political label for himself. He doesn't like those. His Twitter handle, I think, is David Freethink. That'll be, I'll have the link to his Twitter handle and his podcast on the show notes page at decentralizedrevolution.com/72. But it was just really neat to meet someone who is creative, who comes at things from kind of a different perspective and has kind of arrived at some of the same conclusions about society, especially given what's happened over the last couple of years. I think it's really exciting what we're doing with the Mises Caucus, that we're starting to attract interest from people who are kind of outside the LP, who have also, kind of started to wake up about things, or maybe they have been awake for a long time and are just now kind of seeing that there may be an alternative to the two-party thing, that there's a different way to go about politics, and that, without explicitly talking about it, kind of it's the Ron Paul model of being as bold as possible, not really, catering to or pandering for votes, but just staying truthful, talking about freedom, sticking to that. And so, guys like Tim Pool, I think, are kind of in that sphere, who are kind of coming around. And I think what we're building here with the Mises Caucus is going to get much bigger than the LP and what we're doing now, but it's going to take an LP that is equipped to operate in a bold way and to not compromise on liberty. And so, I'm not saying David Sanchez is going to be a part of that, but I am saying that I'm glad that I live in a world where there are guys like him who are really great in their field and who are also starting to wake up about really important things. So I think you'll enjoy my conversation with David Sanchez. Angela McCardle suggested that I have you on the show, and it's a pleasure to have you on. How you doing today?
Yeah, doing well. Happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, where are you podcasting from today?
Denver, Colorado.
Okay. All right. We've got stuff to talk about Denver related. We helped the Mises Caucus a little bit with the decriminalized Denver thing. So we helped just a little bit, but we gave some money and some volunteers there at the very end, and it passed by just a few votes. So a lot of people did a lot more than us, but the 1% that we did actually might have made a difference. So that's good.
That decriminalizing the greenery or the fungus?
No, the psilocybin, yeah.
Okay,
So, and I'm told,
awesome. Thank you.
yeah. I'm told that I don't know if it's the same exact group or roughly the same coalition. I think they're going for the whole same thing in Colorado sometime soon. So if and when that happens, we're gonna be involved, and so we'll definitely let you know.
Yeah, anything I can do to help that along, because
Yeah,
I probably, like a lot of people listening to this, I don't believe in the war on drugs. I think it's a totally failed experiment, and it's nothing but bad news for everyone.
yeah.
So,
It is all around. We could do, yeah. You could have a TV network just dedicated to exposing how bad that is for so many people. I like your shirt. That's Tesla, right?
oh yes, Tesla the man, not the car.
Not the car, which is an important distinction. So you are in a. I'm not a metal guy, but your thrash metal is your genre. Am I right on that?
Yeah, right on the money.
And so you're thrash metal. You're into libertarian-ish politics at least, and you wear a Tesla T-shirt. So you're a free thinker, obviously. And I think that's your one of your Twitter handles somewhere. So like, where did that come from? How did you have always been that way? Did something happen? Why are you one of us, I guess?
Well, even before, I've never really mentioned this in an interview, but this is very real. Even before getting like philosophical about the ideas of freedom and liberty and free thinking and questioning authority and stuff, I got into trouble a lot when I was a kid in school. It got so brutal at one point that they gave me my own desk in the principal's office.
That's good.
In junior high school, they gave me my own desk in the principal's office, and I got to be friends with the principal. He was actually pretty cool. But what really cracked my brain open, especially when I was an adolescent, I must have been like a freshman or sophomore in high school, was getting really into George Carlin. George Carlin really cracked my brain wide open about certain ways the world works and thinking for yourself and questioning things and questioning authority and just being a better critical thinker. That was like the thing that really started things snowballing for me. I mean, the way I was brought up was a factor as well, but George Carlin, and then started reading books by like Carl Sagan, got into philosophy, Marcus Aurelius, Epictetus, Stoic philosophy. And just being a fan of Carlin and Frank Zappa, and there's plenty of comedians that are actually better truth tellers than anything you're ever going to see on corporate news networks. So
yeah,
it started at a very young age, but then Carlin really made it take off as far as
I remember I was kind of a Reagan kid through the 80s, and so when I was like an early teenager and started getting into comedy, like Carlin kind of bothered me a little bit because he was liberal on some things, but some things he said, I was like, oh, I agree with that. And so like, he was one of the first sort of public figures that kind of showed me that you don't have to be in one tribe or another. And so that from that step to being a libertarian is kind of a pretty natural thing, because a lot of people, I think, crave that security, and I'm not criticizing it, it's natural, of being in a tribe, and they think that if I'm not in a big tribe, then I'm in trouble. So I always love people who are willing to risk that and go out, and now we're forming our own little tribes. But it's interesting. You said you were a troublemaker in school. Like I was like a model student and like always like the top of my class and all that. But like in my head, I noticed all the inconsistencies and it did. I had some mental health issues kind of as a result of like repressing some of that knowledge that like the rest of society is kind of sick in some ways. And so I always, looking back, I admire the kids like you who were able to sort of express that outwardly. But that's what's great about not to plug the Mises caucus too much, but we have all kinds of different people in the caucus. So coming at it from different backgrounds, but coming at that same love for liberty, I think is really cool. And like I say, I'm not a I'm not much into metal, but I was listening to some of your stuff. I think the V album, which a lot of the track titles, like the first one, Post-Truth Era, second track, Fear Campaign. Let's just jump right into that. Like where the lyrics for that come from. And I think it's a really good mix of those lyrics with your sound in today. So for someone who's not into this music at all, like I really have enjoyed what I've listened to so far, just because of that coming together.
Well, thank you. I think it's important to note that our last record, V, came out May 1st, 2020. And the entire thing was wrapped up. We were all done recording everything September of 2019, well before we ever heard of COVID-19. So when people heard songs like Fear Campaign and some of these other tracks that are on V, they automatically assumed that it was all written about COVID stuff. It was written about lockdown. It was written about propaganda revolving around this, supposed virus. And it was all written before. Right. So I was just, what I've been doing for the last about 10 years, I'd say, is I see some stuff. I see some writing on the wall for certain subjects. And I see many things as threats to liberty and threats to our autonomy and our true potential to thrive. There are genuine enemies of progress that are trying to rule over us. There's no secret. It's not a conspiracy theory. It's literal fact. I mean, a lot of this stuff is out there in the open, that there are people that wish to dominate you. And I've been singing and writing songs about this stuff for about 10 years. And a lot of metal bands talk about murder and war and the devil and stuff like this, but there's already so many bands doing that. It dawned on me about a decade ago, like, I don't care about that stuff. I want to write stuff I care about. So I write a lot about liberty and critical thought. And I think V had a lot of lyrics on it that have sadly wound up being very prophetic.
Right.
Say the same about our last few records. But for instance, the song Fear Campaign was just like shockingly prophetic. The chorus of the song says they use fear to control you. Yeah. That pretty much sums up the last 2 years in this country and most of the countries on this planet, at least in the Western world.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting. I didn't know that. I didn't really look at the dates when you suggested I listened to the album. But going back to like guys like Carlin and other comedians, Dave Chappelle is another guy that I love. Like they're always just like a little bit ahead of things, and they're kind of the canaries in the coal mine. And so a good musician, a good lyricist, to me, is kind of the same thing. Of like, a lot of times people hear the word like prophet and they think it's like predicting the future. Well, sometimes it's not so much the future as like they just realize what's already happened before everybody else does. Right. So
yes, exactly.
So like, and you said you went back 10 years, and one of the songs I found that was older is the Give Me Liberty or Give Me Death song. So was that one of your first ones that kind of had a political theme?
Yeah, I think so. The record that song is on is called Unnatural Selection, and the artwork for it is in this poster. Okay. But, a crazy scientist dosing the whole world. Imagine that. Speaking of prophetic.
Yeah. He's not, your character in that album is not named Fauci, is he? No. Put some glasses on him, maybe, right?
Yeah, maybe if he had contacts. But Give Me Liberty, Give Me Death was on Unnatural Selection, and that's the album where things really started clicking for me. I think it was largely because I started reading so many books. When I was about 20 years old, I figured out like something clicked in my brain, and I realized I'm way more stupid than I want to be. So I started reading books, and that changed the way I view the world, obviously. It made me, I think, more intelligent. It expanded my vocabulary. It made me question things even more than I already did. And it gave me a more solid foundation for where my questions are coming from and why I believe what I believe. And one of the things about my beliefs, and I think that it's wise to do this, is question them. I question my own beliefs on a regular basis. I have to think, like, why do I believe this? If it doesn't make sense, I need to figure out something different. But if it makes sense and I still have a good reason to believe this thing, and it's backed up by evidence, experience, and anything else that it warrants it being believed in, I hold on to that stuff. Mm-hmm. Stuff that doesn't make sense anymore, I'm more than happy to discard and replace it with something new. Yeah. I'm always open to my mind being changed when presented with new information.
I think that's a thing I've known, and I don't know if you identify as a libertarian, and I'm not trying to make you do so, but like one thing I've noticed about my fellow libertarians is kind of that same thing, that we're kind of obsessed with consistency. And so for that, at the same time, in some ways I think we can sound very closed-minded, but we're also very open-minded in the sense that we are looking for ways to challenge our own assumptions and making sure we're consistent. And so most of the ideological arguments that libertarians have, it always comes down to, are you being consistent with, the basics of libertarianism, which is, don't hurt people, don't take their stuff, let people speak. If you don't have to let people speak in your living room, but if you want to go to their living room to make them stop speaking, that's really bad. So that's one thing I like about libertarians, but that makes us kind of seem weird to the rest of the world, is that sort of obsession with that consistency. So was it, you said something clicked in your head that made you feel you were stupid or not as smart as you wanted to be? What was that? Do you remember?
Just in general,
Okay.
I realized like school didn't, I knew this when I was in high school, that they weren't teaching me a bunch of things that I should know. And, through reading books, watching documentaries, learning about some history that they don't teach you about in school. For instance, the Federal Reserve is not actually a government institution. Yep. There's banks even above the Federal Reserve. There's basically an international world banking cartel. Pearl Harbor, there's lies around that. The Gulf of Tonkin, there's lies around that. 9/11, there's lies around that. And realizing that war is big business. It's not just for, fighting for our freedoms. It's largely to enrich a very few amount of people at the expense of murder and death and destruction. These are things I learned from not only reading books, but watching documentaries, and this kind of stuff like really made me wake up out of my indoctrination.
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned
basically 12 years of obedience training.
Yeah, you're exactly right. You don't have to. Most of the people listening to this will agree with that, and I think that as we see the debate around COVID, like that conditioning is very strong, and you see that come out in people of like, wear your mask. Well, masks don't work. Well, you should wear your mask. It's just it's amazing that people think that way, but it's no mistake that they do. So what you mentioned got into philosophy. So was that one of your early reading interests, and what schools of thought? You mentioned Stoicism too. Let's go down that path a little bit, and then I want to get back to music.
Yeah, Stoicism has been kind of a staple in my life, even since before I knew what that word meant, or knew that it was a philosophy, or knew any of the philosophers themselves. Just how I was kind of raised. I think that with Stoicism, largely what it is you take inventory of the things you can control and the things you cannot control. The things you cannot control, you just got to cut them loose and let those things go. And the things you can control, you do your best with them. And a large facet of the Stoic philosophy also is gratitude. And I was always taught that to be grateful. And the more grateful you are, I think the more happy you are. And there's a great little placard that's at my old house where I used to live and I grew up. And I loved seeing it every day before leaving the house. It says, happiness is a choice. Mm-hmm. And I think that's largely true. 99% of it is what you make of it. So if your life sucks, it's because your mindset sucks.
Yeah.
You know,
And
there's people that have much less than us that have made themselves into much greater things than we typically dream of. And I don't mean you and I mean anyone listening to this.
Yep. Yeah, it's I think Viktor Frankl is a psychiatrist, and his book Man's Search for Meaning is probably one of my favorite books, most influential in my life. And basically he's like, well, they can take away all your freedoms, but they can't take away your freedom on how to react to all that. You know, so that's the one thing they can't take away from you. And another thing that one of my professors from college way back, he was actually a philosophy professor and a libertarian. And a couple of years ago, I reconnected with him because I found out he basically lived in the next neighborhood over from mine. His name is William Irvin, and I'll send you some link to him, but he's written a lot about the Stoics. And I've read at least one book of his, I think maybe one and a half. And another thing the Stoics do is the kind of, to expand on the gratitude thing, is you look at the things you're grateful for in your life and you imagine, or you think about the fact that they're not always going to be there. Like with our dog, a lot of times I look at our dog and like, well, she's not going to be around in 15 years. And so that, you know, just increases the gratitude I have in the moment. And that's a good trick to learn.
Yeah, it really is. It makes you live more immediately and appreciate what you've got. Realizing that your life is finite and that everything is finite. It really puts things in perspective. And I love that about Stoic philosophy.
Let's get back into talking about music, and then because it's got a really big current events twist to it as to what's happened in the music industry the last couple of years. But yeah, I've thought a lot about music recently. I had a health issue a few years ago, and it kind of got me out of the habit of playing music. In the last few months, I've gotten back into it. I was telling you right before we went on that, you know, I've built my calluses back up in my left hand so I can do the bass and not shred my fingers. And I think about it was the music around I was 13, 14, 15 that kind of crystallized my taste. So, you know, Bob Dylan, Tom Petty, the band, Hendrix, Clapton, those guys. Who was it for you? When did you start becoming aware of music, and who's that, you know, constellation of musicians that when you think of why you're into music, who are those people?
Well, the band that really made me fall in love with music and inspired me to pick up a guitar in the first place is Metallica. Old Metallica like completely changed my life. It totally changed the trajectory of my entire existence.
Yep.
You know, I fell in love with their old music and started getting into a bunch of other bands that are similar. But nowadays, my musical influences come from a lot of different places, way more eclectic than they ever were when I was younger. I really love experimental, like weird avant-garde music. I like a lot of jazz, a lot of classical music. I love flamenco and gypsy jazz. I'm also a big fan of like big band swing. I love funk. Funk's one of my favorite things ever to listen to. I like new wave. I like disco stuff. I like a lot of different music that I didn't know about when I was a kid. And say what you want about Spotify, anyone, but I owe a lot of my musical knowledge to Spotify. Suggesting things. I would like this band and look up what other bands sound like this. And I would discover, you know, just go down infinite rabbit holes, discovering new artists that I otherwise would have never found because it would be more work to seek them out.
It was work for me. Like I graduated high school in '93. So for me, it was like reading guitar magazines and hearing Eric Clapton mention, you know, Robert Johnson in an interview, and, you know, hearing Bob Dylan with Woody Guthrie. And so I would have to go to the bookstore. I lived right next to, you know, right adjacent to the downtown in my little street. And so there was a bookstore, newsstand, and a library. So I would get the guitar magazines at the one place, find out the bands I should like, and then go to the library and say, "Do you have this music?"
Yeah. I remember that back in the day too.
Yeah, and to me, I almost here I sound like an old guy again. Like and I'm not criticizing young people because they're obviously doing it, but like to me, that it almost makes it, that's part of what makes it special for me, because I couldn't do it at a click and find my way from Eric Clapton to Robert Johnson in 30 seconds. I had to wait 2 weeks for the CDs to come in and stuff. So
right.
So what was it about Metallica? Like, how old were you? When was that? And like, I mean, I can guess, but like, I'd like to hear you talk about it. What was it about them, sonically, lyrically, attitude that grabbed you and made you want to go that extra step and not just like chill out to it or, use it as an emotional tool, the way a lot of people just look at music, but to then make that your hobby and then your livelihood?
Well, I was 13 when I picked up a guitar, so I must have been like 11 or 12 when I first started listening to metal and Metallica. And I remember watching, they have this great live video called Live Shit, Binge and Purge. Mm-hmm. And it's pretty epic and classic. And I remember watching them just play in front of an arena full of people, and all of the people losing their minds, and everyone's head banging and having fun, and the music's super heavy and fast and loud. And watching that, I was like, I think that looks like the most fun thing to do. I need to learn how to do that. So I told my parents I wanted to get a guitar, and they helped me rent a guitar and an amp while I was first taking lessons, because they were like, I don't know if he's actually going to take this serious. And I don't blame them for that. Renting a guitar and amp is better than spending hundreds and hundreds of dollars on that stuff. But I started taking lessons and learning a little bit. And when I first started playing guitar, that's all I did.
Yeah.
I played my guitar all the time, every chance that I got. And I started Havok a couple years later. And kind of the rest is history. Started writing music, jamming with other people, and writing my own songs, and it just developed and blossomed into what it is today. And at this point, we've toured with a lot of legendary bands that I used to listen to just as a fan, just falling in love with metal. And now I've toured with them and partied with them and hung out with them and have some of their phone numbers. It's crazy.
Why do you think you picked guitar rather than bass or drums? And what was the first guitar you saved up for, or the first guitar you wanted and that you owned and fell in love with?
Well, I did consider playing bass at first, but my mom is a classically trained guitar player, and she was like, well, just learn guitar, and then like if you need to play bass, you can figure it out from there.
Right. That's how I did it. I played at church, and I played guitar starting around 15 or 16, but if the bass player couldn't make it that week, they're like, here's the bass. And so I learned on the job that way.
Yeah. It's trial by fire.
Yep.
I did consider drums, but they're so expensive and so loud. So that was out. Guitar was simple, tiny. You could take it with you everywhere.
So what did your mom think about, you said flamenco?
She's a classical guitarist.
Classical.
Yeah. She used to like win competitions and stuff when she was a kid.
Well, there's a lot of, obviously it's the same instrument and there's a lot of overlap, but coming from, I kind of learned just from listening to records and tablature, but, so what did she think about you liking metal, and how much were you able to learn from her?
Well, she didn't mind the metal stuff. She actually found a lot of it just as interesting as I did. Maybe not quite as interesting, but, early on, she taught me a few things like about natural harmonics and, the best way to fret things, or taught me about vibrato, although vibrato on a classical guitar is quite a bit different because you wiggle your hand side to side horizontal. Whereas on a electric guitar, you're going vertical.
Mm-hmm.
But she taught me a handful of tricks early on, and she wound up eventually liking a lot of the bands that I was showing her. I was making her listen to.
Yep. Yeah, I see. I again, another thing we mentioned right before we came on is not only classical stuff, but I'm a big bluegrass fan, and so guys like Tony Rice, and even like, before that, a mandolin player named Bill Monroe. Like, there's a lot of, how fast they play and the pick techniques and stuff is very similar to a lot of metal stuff that I know, and rock stuff. What was I think I interrupted you. What was the first guitar that you really latched onto and was your baby?
Oh yeah. The first one that I really latched onto that was my baby was a Gibson Explorer.
Mm-hmm.
It's a Gothic Explorer. It's got like a Les Paul 58 neck on it, so it's a different neck than a traditional Gibson Explorer. But that thing, I played it every show, played it every day for like 5 years straight.
Yeah, that's classic. Do you still have it?
I do still have it.
Okay.
And they've gone way up in price. I got that thing for like 700, maybe $750. And nowadays they go for quite a bit more than that.
Yeah. Guitars. It's funny, if they're good guitars and people like them. So like, not only is it like, does a famous person play one, but like, if it's good, it's amazing how, like, look at pre-war Martin, guitars that bluegrass players play. It's more expensive than my house, but also we have the Federal Reserve to thank for the price tag too, right? The inflation.
Yeah, and it was nice that they sold us all on the Fed. Not you and I; we weren't even alive, but the people on the idea that they'll make sure that inflation doesn't get out of control.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's funny. Even today, you'll like you read a news story and they're like, the Fed inflation targets and keeping things under control. It's like, oh, haven't you paid attention for the last 100 years? There's a million kids who pick up a guitar and not many who are able to get to where you are, I understand you're not Metallica yet, but you're can headline some smaller tours and fairly, maybe mid-sized venues. That's what Angela told me. So if I'm wrong, blame it on Angela. But how did you, again, the dedication to believe you can do it, the hard work, like, why do you think that you were one of the ones who it didn't just stay a hobby for you?
Well, I think it was largely the hard work, but also having a support system. Like, my parents were super supportive of it. And, when I first started it and I told them like, hey, I want to be a touring musician, I don't want to go to college. I was 17 and both of my parents were pretty much like, that's totally fine. But if you want to be a touring musician and like make this a career, that's all right. Just do it.
Mm-hmm.
If that's your decision, just actually follow through and do it. Make it happen.
Yeah.
So I kind of took that baton and ran with it as hard as I could. And it's been a long time now. I started the band when I was 15. I'm 33 now. So
okay.
Been in this band for most of my life.
So when was your first paid gig, and what did that feel like? And how did you tell me how you got, guys to play with you, the lead up to that first paid gig, and when was that? So when did you know, hey, I can actually convince people to give me money to do this?
I think the first time that we made money was probably a door deal. Probably got just based on how many people we brought into the venue, and convincing other people to play with us. I guess I started the band with a guy that played drums in my high school who was also a huge Metallica fan. He knew how to play a bunch of their songs on drums. I knew how to play a bunch of their songs on guitar. So we would get together after school and play these songs. And eventually wound up that I would show him like, hey, I made these couple riffs. Check this out. Put some drums to it and let's play like our own stuff. And that's kind of how things started. But I think it's a lot easier to convince other people to join up with your musical project when you have recordings and
mm-hmm.
or they see you live. So you either got to record something or you got to play out.
Yep.
It's hard to just convince somebody to join your band without them being able to hear or see it.
Yeah. So what's it like, when you do a paid gig, that's gotta be just a good feeling. And also, like, how does that affect your playing and your creativity to start getting feedback, not of, oh yeah, I heard, you gave me a CD and I kind of liked it, but like to get that more visceral, tactile feedback from people?
Well, I mean, getting paid to play in the beginning is really, really exciting. And then it turns into going on tour and then getting paid enough to not lose money on the tour. That's really exciting. And then it turns into going on tour and getting paid enough that you get to come home and put money in your pocket. And that's, a huge hurdle to get over. But when you finally get to that point, you're like, yes, like we can actually make this a career. We can make this our job. This is what we do for a living. And it takes a long time to get to that step. I can attest to that. Maybe there's other means of doing it faster, but we've built our whole thing like a pyramid. It's not built on stilts. We didn't go from 0 to 100 overnight.
Mhm.
It's been a very slow burn. So our fan base can never just get the rug can never get pulled out from under us, so to speak. Whereas these bands that go from 0 to 100, they might disappear just as quick as they came up, but that's not the case with Havok.
So did you, I haven't looked into this part of it, but, and I know so when was your first, paid gig, about what year?
Probably like 2005, 2006.
Okay. So the music industry has changed so much in my lifetime. And I love hearing people have so many different stories of how they can make it work. So did you seek a record deal? Did you get one? How did you start the business side of things? And tell me if there's any how the state and government kind of affect how you run the business side of things.
Well, we did seek a record deal. We sent a demo with like a press kit, some photos, bio, list of accomplishments, tour dates we've done, stuff like that, reviews. We put them all into old cereal boxes. That's how we would ship stuff out because they were cheap and we already had them, So we sent a CD and a T-shirt, some stickers, and a bio and all that kind of stuff. We sent it out to a bunch of labels and eventually got a couple of them to hit us back and say, hey, we want to sign you guys. And we kind of just went back and forth, deliberated between the two different contracts, and eventually settled on one. And that's how our first 3 real records came out. And then later we switched labels. But we solicited a deal. We weren't just like found miraculously. We worked to get there.
Yeah. And
as far as government intervening with business in the music industry, I would say
pre-COVID. We're going to talk about COVID, but
okay.
Yeah.
Pre-COVID, I mean, some of the tax stuff is a little bit complicated when you play in different states or different countries. That can definitely get a little weird. That's different states. It's not the United States government doing that all the time, but that complicates things a bit. And then there's also certain laws that I think are really stupid. Like if we play in a bar and it's 21 plus, kids that are 19, 20 years old can't come to the show. Like just put giant X's on their hands with permanent markers and don't give them alcohol. And if you see them with alcohol, kick them out. This isn't that complicated.
Yeah. Or better yet, lower the drinking age to at least 18, right? Like,
sure.
Yeah.
If you can sign yourself up to die in a war or shoot a porno and buy a house and sign a contract, I think you should be able to have a sip of beer.
To have a beer at a show.
Yeah, that is something that I would love to see change in our lifetime.
And because that's for any band, especially, on the way up, new acts, like it's essential that you get, it's always teenagers that start to create the buzz around you. It's teenagers and, people who haven't kind of started their, real adult lives yet. So to have, and for a band like yours, like I would imagine from most music, at least all the music I grew up on, like being there to see it is such an added element. So like that's actually really affecting your livelihood and your ability to sort of catch fire, to say that, basically 16 to 21-year-olds can't even see it.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah. And those people that are young, they become fans for life.
Yep.
You might be broken young right now, but 10 years later, they're going to have a good job and still be following you.
Yep.
And that's not all coming from like we need to absorb as many fans as possible. But at the end of the day, it's kind of what you're trying to do, especially when you go on tour to make money. If you're just putting out music for the love of it, that's all good and fine. But when you're trying to make a career, make a living out of it, you want more butts in the seats.
Yeah. So, and I'm not asking for numbers on this or even percentages, but I've always heard that that's where the money comes from, even with, only like the very, very top guys like Metallica or Tom Petty, to name two we've mentioned. Those are the only guys who like get like mega rich from like recordings, right? Like most everybody else, and even them, they make tons of money on, if they do it right. The touring has always been the bread and butter. Am I right?
Yeah, touring is absolutely where we make our money. So these last 2 years have severely crippled not just us, but tons of artists that are used to making their money on the road. Because back in the day, you had bands that would put out 2 records a year or just one every year for like a decade straight. This is in the 70s, in the early 80s. People had to buy your record if they wanted to listen to it.
Yep.
Otherwise, they'd have to wait listening to the radio station, for 3 hours to maybe play it.
Yeah.
People just went out and got your record. They had to pay for it. They didn't have Spotify's of the world paying people 0.003 cents per listen of your song. It was somebody likes your band, they're going to go spend $10 to buy the album. Yep. So back in the day, you could not even tour and make a shitload of money just making records, making studio albums. And this is back in the day where a record label would give you a bunch of money and they wouldn't necessarily, it wasn't standard practice yet to keep all of that money, withhold your royalties to pay themselves back for the recording. Now that's totally standard. Yeah. So people get this misconception that, at least with what I'm familiar with, and most of the bands that I'm familiar with, how things work, the label doesn't give you money to go record. They loan you money to go record. Here's $30,000, go make an album. And then when it sells like hotcakes, the first $30,000 that you were supposed to get in royalties, we'll just keep that to pay ourselves back. Yeah. So all it really is an interest-free loan.
Yep.
Whereas back in the day, that wasn't necessarily the case. They'd give a band, $200,000, and it would cost them $100,000 to make the record. They'd split the other $100,000 so they could all like take a few months off and actually go make a record and survive.
Yeah.
And things are not like that anymore. So streaming really, touring really is where everything's at for us. So the fact that the last couple of years happened just absolutely devastated the industry. And it devastated a lot of industries. And restaurants, tons of them are never coming back. But the entertainment industry, live entertainment, first thing to go, and it's the last thing to fully come back.
Yeah. So let's. I really want to get into this because, we had a couple of people who made a documentary who are Mises Caucus members in California called The Unseen, and they focused on restaurant owners. I think 4 or 5 different restaurant owners in California the first few months of COVID, and what the government did to them and their efforts to stay alive. And so was heartbreaking, but also very interesting. And like, I always like hearing people's stories. Not, again, I don't like it, but I think it's so valuable to hear the stories of how the state affects how people just again, want to make a living. And from what I've heard, like, there is, I will say what I've heard, but like, I would imagine there's been a divergence of opinion as to how people in the music industry, both on the artist side and the venue side, have responded to COVID, and like what they've said publicly, maybe versus what they really think. So let's get into that. So you start right before COVID. You have your album, the Havok's V album, right?
Yep.
That's ready. You've spent months on it. It's great. You put it. It's done. You're probably got your tour lined up, I would imagine. And then they start canceling NBA games and telling everybody they have to stay inside. So what happened from that moment? That must have been like a holy crap moment for you, right?
Oh yeah, we were literally supposed to start touring the day the album came out on May 1st, 2020.
Mm-hmm.
And we found out, I don't know, 4 weeks before, maybe a little less, that the tour was not going to take place. So
because everybody calls you and says, hey, they're shutting us down in Kansas. We can't play in Ohio. So those dominoes must have fallen pretty quickly.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And we halfway expected it. We definitely held off on confirming our merch order of t-shirts.
Yeah, well, that's good.
Because we were like, this is all the stuff we want. We got the invoice ready and everything. We were like, but let's not print those yet because we don't know what's going to happen. And I'm glad we did, because everything got canceled. And remember when it was 2 weeks to flatten the curve?
Yep.
The hardest part of the first 2 weeks is the first 2 years.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. And we were supposed to go to Europe as well. After that US-Canada run that was supposed to happen in May, we were supposed to go to Europe, I think in June or July. And that was going to be awesome. We were going to play a bunch of festivals out there, which is always a great time. And you know, gets us in front of a lot of people that normally would never come see us because they just happened to be at the festival. So you could easily argue that our business was injured and disrupted by this whole thing. And not just financially, but like other measures of success were also inhibited. But this is not just all about us. This is globally. This is everyone. I mean, there's some cities where I think 40% of independent restaurants shut down and are never going to come back.
Yep.
We're talking about millions, tens of millions, maybe hundreds of millions of people's lives and dreams absolutely destroyed permanently because of government intervention.
Yep.
The virus did not shut people's businesses down. The virus did not make your kids wear masks. Yep. The virus did not do any of this stuff. The governments did this stuff to the people. Yep. And that's a big distinction that I think a lot of what we would call normies don't see. They don't understand that. Oh, the whole world shut down because of the virus. No, the whole world shut down because of governments overreacting to a virus where the average age of death is 82 years old.
Yeah.
The average age of death is people that already escaped death and cheated death.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. And my sister who's 40 almost died from it. And like everybody knows somebody who's been affected, but again, you have to think in terms of trade-offs. Like if we, how many people die in car wrecks every year? What, 30, 40, 50,000 in the States. So by the same logic, we should all be walking to work in the grocery store all the day, because that's the attitude that the government took to it.
Yeah.
Was zero COVID fatalities is our goal. Well, unfortunately, Mother Nature is not going to cooperate with that, as we've seen it with New Zealand and Australia and even Taiwan, who I have, my wife's family is from Taiwan, and I love Taiwan, and they kept COVID out. They're an island nation, so they kept it out for a long time. But guess what? It eventually made its way there, because that's how nature works. And people, you say that, in the beginning, I think that it kind of was half government and half the people. Like I was cautious that first couple of weeks, because, my parents are in their early 70s. My nephew has a respiratory thing. so like I was washing my hands, I was wearing a mask, and then after 2-3 weeks, I was like, I thought, that the ambulances were going to be coming to take my neighbors to the hospital, all day long, right? The way it was sold
Sure.
was that this is they almost had everybody thinking it was going to be like a zombie epidemic, right? People were making
Like the
jokes
plague.
about it.
Like the new death. Yeah.
And so people naturally, if they see a threat, they don't need a law to tell them to be careful. They need a law to tell them to stay careful after it's clear that it's not as bad as was sold,
Sure. Yep.
Yeah. So what was, I would, I know a lot of people have kind of made jokes about bands like Rage Against the Machine and other people who have like been totally on board, and like, didn't they do like a PSA or something encouraging people to get the vaccine or whatever? So like,
bands doing this bootlicking.
well, let's talk about that, because obviously I would think the aesthetic of metal, and in particular your brand of metal, kind of doesn't seem to be, hey, let's do what the establishment says, right? So like, let's analyze that. What have you heard? Is there a disconnect between what other musicians in your field are saying privately versus saying publicly? Is there a big resistance to this? How long did the resistance take to get going? Let's talk about the differences and the debates within your world.
Well, it is funny you bring this up, because you would think the optics of the heavy metal and punk rock and hardcore crowds are rebels, and that's a complete facade that we can absolutely say unequivocally that is a total sham at this point, because most of the people in these genres absolutely just bent over and pulled their pants down for Big Daddy government and their marriage with giant corporations, pharmaceutical specifically right now. There's a word for that when government and big business get together to screw people over. It's called fascism.
Yep.
And these people that you would think are totally anti-establishment, these people that sung songs and sung along to bands talking about "fuck you, I won't do what you tell me," and I'm anti-government, anti-establishment, anti-corporations. I think for myself. I'm an independent person. I love liberty. And what a joke. Most of the people in this genre have been so exposed by this whole thing, because these even bands, for instance, Rage on Behalf of the Machine, a bunch of other bands, punk rock bands, metal bands that talked about liberty and talked about how bad government is and talked about how bad big business is, and thinking for yourself and really being open-minded and anti-authoritarian. So many of these artists and fans of these artists have completely just drank the Kool-Aid and are not thinking for themselves. They're not anti-authority. They're pro-authority. They're not anti-corporation. They're literally the biggest cheerleaders. They'll publicly fight for and on behalf of these corporations that they said that was the devil. Remember when the big pharma company was like jacking up the prices of AIDS medication, like 7 years ago, something like that?
Right.
And there was that snarky dude with the slick back hair that everyone hated.
Martin Shkreli, I think. Is that the guy you're talking about?
I think Martin was his name, yeah.
Yeah.
So I remember then Big Pharma was the devil. And how could you ever trust these people? These people are so out of touch with anything good and positive. The Big Pharma is the devil. They are not to be trusted. How dare they? Those exact same people, just a few years later, when this whole thing comes about.
Mm-hmm.
Big Pharma is so good. I love them. How could you ever question anything they do?
Yeah. So why do you think someone would embrace an aesthetic that is anti-authoritarian, but not actually be that? Like what, and again, not to like hate on people, but to just try to understand why, why would you sing one thing and identify with that as a fan and then not be able to have that, yeah, why that? It's cognitive dissonance, right?
It's absolutely cognitive dissonance. It's doublethink in the classic Orwellian sense of it. And I call these people freedom posers. These are freedom posers. They talked a big game, and then when it came down to actually prove what they say their beliefs are, they just crumbled.
Yeah.
Absolutely crumbled. And it's embarrassing to me as a member of like that community that's supposed to be anti-authoritarian and pro-liberty and thinking for yourself and, you know, fuck the man and fuck all these evil corporations. That's the idea people get of punk rockers and heavy metal fans and shit like that. And I'm embarrassed. I'm appalled at how eager people are to lick the boot of authoritarianism.
And it's funny, and I'm gonna I actually think it's funny that two of my favorites from when I was 14, Eric Clapton and Van Morrison, these old guys who are supposedly establishment, they're the guys who actually go out and are taking heat on this. And part of it, I think here's the reason why. And a guy like Dave Chappelle and Joe Rogan, like all of those guys, they've got FU money, right? Like you can't touch them.
Sure.
And so what does it say about our society that the only people who have the stones to get up and speak against this are the people who, you know, they've made their money, they've had their career, and they're unassailable. That creative people who are still, and not to disparage any of those guys, especially Chappelle, who's still cutting edge in every way, like, you know, that other people who are still trying to create art are afraid to either they've bought in and have the doublethink, or there's a lot of them, I think, who are afraid. They see that half their fan base is saying this, and they do the calculation. Do I speak out, or do I just stay quiet and wait till it opens back up? And then there's a small minority of guys, not to suck up to you, but like in all these different genres, there's a few musicians who are willing to say, hey, this is wrong. But I think that says much more about our society, that the artists, the people who are supposed to be on the cutting edge and saying things that are unpopular right before everybody else, they're the people that are when those people are afraid, then we've got problems.
Absolutely. And you just brought up a good point that I was thinking about earlier, but we went other places, but now we're back to, I do think you're right. There's a lot of people that are afraid. And, you know, I'm not the only person in of my peers that's speaking out and saying something, but it's rare. It's very, very rare. There's not many. Like you mentioned, Van Morrison, Eric Clapton. What other like classic rockers are saying anything?
Yeah.
Not many. Not many at all. But I notice it too with my peers and in my circles. Most people are quiet. And I even hear from friends and other people that agree with what I'm saying and agree with me speaking out and agree with the ideas that I'm spreading about bodily autonomy and truly starting to wake up and just like snap out of this television stupor. Like, hey, people, the government is not your friend. They've never been your friend, and it's never been more obvious. Why are you still playing their game?
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of people that I talk to that agree with me, but don't say anything because they don't want to rock the boat. They don't want to upset fans. They don't want to lose fans. And I understand that. I can absolutely understand both sides of this coin. You don't want to lose fans. You want to just save face and secretly agree and be on the side of tyranny. On the side of freedom, but in secret. And when you're doing, when you're favoring freedom over tyranny secretly, it's almost as if you're working on behalf of the tyranny, because courage is contagious. And when more people start speaking up and saying the thing that goes against the norm, that snowballs. And more people start agreeing with that and recognizing, hey, this is like not a fringe thing to say or believe. There's actually a lot of people that agree with me on this, and I feel comfortable now speaking out. that's a big reason I started speaking out about this stuff, because I didn't see anyone doing it. I kept my mouth shut for about a year with all this stuff. I had these same thoughts, but I didn't say anything because I didn't want to rock the boat. But eventually there's a straw that breaks the camel's back. And I just couldn't hold my tongue anymore. This literally uprooted my entire life. This uprooted my entire career, my livelihood, and not just me, but millions and millions of other people. And when they started pushing out this experimental injection on everybody, that's when I really started paying attention and trying to be more vocal. Like, people, this is you guys are waltzing, dancing right into a bear trap.
Yep.
Like, your freedoms lost are hardly ever given back to you. Just like I think wasn't Thomas Paine, it was Patrick Henry, I think, that talked about the jewel of liberty, that you should guard it with jealous attitude, because anyone that wants to come anywhere close to that precious jewel of liberty, you should suspect them of the worst things.
Yep.
And you got the quote?
I'm trying to find it.
Yeah, I think it's Patrick Henry about the precious jewel of liberty.
Okay, I'll look it up and we'll find it. But like, that's, to me, that's not only liberty, but specifically, I think, like, the freedom of speech. Like, it's, and I don't necessarily want to get off on this, because the last couple of podcasts we've talked about is like some of the stuff with social justice, that, there are people who are advocating things in the name of social justice who are openly saying we don't want liberalism in the classical sense. We are against tolerance and free speech because those are tools of one group or another. So to me, that's like an automatic, like, I'm going to question every single thing about your agenda. If you say anything about liberty, I'm suspicious. But when you go after freedom of speech, and which is really freedom of thought, like, you have poisoned the well as far as me listening to your ideas, because that says to me you're not willing to defend them in a fair fight and advocate them on their own merits. And so and especially, like, again, like, if you can't to go back to touring, like, if you can't go out and play in front of people, they're not going to hear. It's a huge part of your business model, and it's a huge part of how people actually hear you and your ideas. So, like, that's the other thing, so the COVID thing, it's prevented people from getting together at bars and talking. It's prevented artists, like comedians and musicians, from saying what they want to say about it. And then, so that's the ground level. But then the up top, the corporate media, is anybody who diverges from the whatever Fauci or CNN says today. It's all misinformation. Like, there's this, from the top and from the bottom, going after that freedom of speech. To me, that's the jewel of the jewel right there.
Absolutely. It's first for a reason.
Yep. Yeah. Yep. That's exactly right. How are you writing about any of these things yet?
I mean, I've already written about so many of these things.
Yeah.
Speaking about free speech, like, I wrote a song that's on our record before last. The album's called Conformicide, and the first song on the record is called FPC. And I'm sure a lot of people can figure out what that stands for. But I'm absolutely all about free speech. I think that even bad ideas should 100% be allowed to be vocalized, because then you put a bad idea up against a good one, and everyone learns. And the person that spreads the bad ideas looks like an idiot. We shouldn't be censoring anybody for anything.
And especially, like, a lot of people, among the people I was referring to earlier, will say things, they'll start their attacks on free speech by, people who are racist or whatever. And for someone who also opposes racism, I think that we should talk about those things, and that sane people should tell those people how they're wrong, rather than giving them a persecution complex. And then, so a crazy person with a bad idea, if he has to talk to rational people in the open, is not going to get very far. But if he goes to other sort of crazy people, disaffected people in the corners of the internet and says, look what they won't let you talk about, that all of a sudden that has an appeal to certain people. And so to me, the worse the idea is, the more it should be, hey, yeah, let's talk about that. We can get rid of that idea that some people are better than others because of biology. Yeah, we can dispose of that pretty quickly. Yeah. Unless we, put it way off to the side and let it incubate.
Yeah. I like the idea of bad ideas being out in the open so that they can be very easily shot down by good ideas.
Yeah. Would you rather know that your neighbor is like a Nazi, or would you rather not know that you have a Nazi living next door to you? Right.
Yeah. Very, very obvious. I have to know that he's a Nazi. And, Nazis, KKK members, all this stuff. Like, I don't agree with their stance on things. I don't agree with their ideology, but I absolutely believe that they should be allowed to vocalize their bad opinions, because then their bad opinions are open season.
Yeah. And a lot of people, not only that will defeat the people who are the ringleaders of that stuff, but that's your chance to win back the people who have been sort of poisoned by it. Like, if you engage them as a rational being, sure, that even though you might hate and be afraid of what they believe in, if you give them the courtesy, if you treat them better than they want to treat you, and engage with them, some of them they're going to be convicted in their heart that, hey, I'm wrong, and so that's a way that those people can be brought back to sanity. But if you keep telling people that you can't talk about this, you're horrible, anybody who thinks this is completely evil, then that's how you get some pretty nasty movements. But I think that what a lot of the COVID stuff goes to, and a lot of the people who want to attack free speech and civil rights in the classical American Bill of Rights sense, like, they do actually want to divide people and get people hating each other. And like, as a musician, like, that's like everything, you're against that because you want all kinds of different people to hear your music and get together. So I hope that the guys like you are able to counteract that spirit that's around, that, oh, we all have to retreat to our little tribes and hate everybody on the other side of things.
Yeah, and this is why I would consider myself, I don't like labels, but if I had to call myself anything, I'd call myself a free thinker, because, like I said, my mind is open to being changed on a dime if presented with good information. It makes me change my mind. Yeah. And that's a big thing that I talk about in songs and on stage and between songs sometimes, is that the political spectrum is basically a circle. If you go far enough left or you go far enough right, eventually you're in a circle. So you wind up at the same exact asshole that wants to take all your rights away. Yeah. So I don't believe in either of the two major parties. I don't believe in the division, like you're talking about, the tribalism. I think it's very bad. I think that the things that connect us and we have in common with each other maybe are more limited, because the things that divide us all have different names and they're so numerous. The things that divide us can, be enumerated all day, every day. But the things that connect us and we all have in common may be more limited in number, but they're so overarching. They absolutely eclipse all the things that we have different from each other. Yeah. Things we share in common are so huge that, and that's one of the things that sadly the media and many institutions and organizations work toward, is divide and conquer, because the more divided we are, the less likely we are to realize that we actually have a lot in common and our problems are mainly coming from somewhere else. We should be looking at our common enemies instead of fighting with each other. That's the number one thing that terrifies the establishment.
Yep. It's not us versus them. It's the state versus you. That's why I always try to tell people.
Yeah. And it's not just the state versus you. It's the state versus us.
Yep.
because
Yeah, you're right.
we actually are all kind of on the same playing field when it comes to the state versus its what they would call their subjects.
Yeah. So where do you get, as someone who, isn't, a self-labeler and who is a free thinker, where do you get your information about stuff, given the fact that most of the big avenues are not telling the truth or obscuring the truth, and that, this sense, it's not censorship. I want to be clear on that, but it's the same attitude of the big tech sort of shaping the narrative, and right down to when you type something in the search bar, just about every search engine has an agenda, and you can figure it out pretty quickly if you just use a little imagination. Where do you get your information? What podcasts, journalists, where do you find out what's going on, and how do you piece together your to try to get at the truth from different sources?
So I get it from a lot of different places. There's podcasts, there's things I watch on YouTube, on BitChute, Odyssey, things like that. I also follow a lot of social media pages that talk about things that the mainstream corporate media is not going to touch ever. And I'm also involved with some like group chats with other people that are of like minds, and we share information back and forth. Hey, I saw this crazy thing going on, and I looked it up, and it's true. Everyone look at this. And everyone just kind of swaps news in that sense. And that's a good way that I get a lot of my information. But things that people could easily look up for themselves that I find very, very valuable are like Ron Paul's Liberty Report. I think he touches on a lot of important stuff. And I don't know if you are familiar with James Corbett, the Corbett Report.
I think it faintly rings a bell. While you talk about him, let me look it up.
Yeah, James Corbett is a Canadian man who lives in Japan, but he is a very thorough researcher, and he's extremely well read and knows what he's talking about when he brings up a subject. If he doesn't fully understand it, he'll just, put it off the table until he does learn more. But he's a very, very good journalist, independent journalist, and a researcher. I would consider him a researcher more than a journalist.
Okay.
I guess there's a fine line, but there's also people like Ben Swan, I think is great. Yep. Whitney Webb, I think is great.
What was that last one?
Whitney Webb.
Whitney Webb. Okay.
Yeah, I believe she also works with the dude Ryan from The Last American Vagabond. Okay. There's a ton of these people. The Free Thought Project, I think, is one of the best news outlets.
Yeah, we had Jason from the Free Thought Project on a long time ago.
Oh yeah, Jason's great.
Yep.
Yeah. You should get him back on. He's got a lot to say about what's going on right now. I had him on my podcast not too long ago, and their page. I mean, if you're on Instagram or Facebook, I think their page is one of the key ones that you should be following if you're interested in liberty and just ideas that you're not going to hear on the mainstream. The Free Thought Project does amazing work.
They do. And they're like, to me, one of the textbook cases of like the tech crackdown on shaping the narrative, because like 8-10 years ago, their reach was much huger. Their stuff would pop up in my feed here, on this platform or that platform all the time. And now, like, I sometimes forget they're there. I got to go look because they've been buried. I don't know if they've been deplatformed from any place yet, but I'm sure the algorithm and I want to call them censors, even though they're not technically, but they are kind of working with the government sometimes. So maybe, but like, there are people at Facebook who, in addition to write the algorithm, I'm sure they look at these stories and they, give them the thumbs down. Okay, let's bury this page. And Free Thought Project is again, that's a textbook. I should get him back on to help him explain how that happened and what he's seen happen to other people, especially in the last couple of years. So 100%. I'll put links to all that stuff on the show notes page, as well as to your stuff. Tell me a little bit. Let's talk about fun stuff before we go. First of all, what is up with Havok? Are you back on the road yet? How's business looking? How's your art looking? And then let's talk about what you're listening to before we head out.
Yeah, so with Havok, we don't really have much going on right now. Everyone's kind of doing their own thing, but we've discussed the idea of kicking around some new tunes and maybe working out some cover songs that people would not expect us to do. So we've been talking a little bit and writing. I've been writing some new music a little bit. So maybe we'll put out a new record sometime next year, or late this year. I don't know. But as of now, no touring is happening. Things are still kind of shaky, on shaky ground. And just to be honest with you, I kind of want to, before we go out on tour again, if we have the choice of where we're playing, I want to figure out which venues didn't do any of this brown shirt, jackboot, blood eagle, armband stuff.
Right.
I want to know which venues never complied with any of this stuff, that were actually giving a hoot about people's bodily autonomy, their freedom of privacy. You know?
Yeah, that would be a good project to log a lot of those places.
It's got to exist somewhere. Like, somebody send me some venues in your town where the venues didn't do any of that nonsense, because those are the ones I'd rather support if I have a choice. And
then, of course, the businesses that, maybe they didn't, risk. And again, I think that you're right. The people who have stood up, and, I've heard stories of restaurants and places like that across the country who never shut down, never made their employees and customers wear a mask. Some of them paid the price with fines. Some of them are probably going to be fighting it out in court, trying to maybe it'll kill them eventually, or maybe it did. But like there are probably tons of people who didn't agree with it, but out of not wanting, hoping to wait this out, I know there's got to be tons of people who have not consented to, or who could be putting on shows but are not, because they couldn't do it without the vax requirement. So that's a thing. I think we all need to, as liberty lovers, whether you're conservative, libertarian, liberal, or whatever label, like, I think it's important that we, when we can, try to support those people who did what you're talking about, is stand up for people's rights to actually control what goes in their bodies. I mean,
you have to support those businesses, because if you don't support them, they go away.
Yeah.
It's different than what I was saying earlier about people that are on the side of liberty, but they're very silent about it. That's the financial and economic equivalent.
Mm-hmm.
I really love that this business didn't shut down, and I really love that they're not forcing people to show their papers and stuff, but I don't go there.
Yeah.
Fuck that. Go there.
Yeah. So I hope that, I know Tennessee, where I live, is pretty good. I know that there's a lot of shows. I'm in Knoxville. And I know that there's some like little things going on here. I think in some venues, like one of my favorite bands is a band called Dawes, Dawes. They came and they were playing this was about 7-8 months ago. And they were playing something. It's like a concert series, like somewhat sponsored by the city or something like that. And there was a mask requirement for an outdoor concert. And even though they're 10 minutes from my house, I didn't go. And I didn't go see Bob Dylan. I've seen Bob Dylan 15 times. Bob Dylan's, 15 minutes from my house. And I haven't seen him in 3 years, but I didn't go because I'm not going through the charade of wearing a mask. And so, it's just a shame that just the experiences that people have missed out on, in addition to like the businesses, because business and making money and being able to be a touring musician is super important. But just think of all like the cool stuff that happens at concerts, the people who would have met a new girlfriend or a boyfriend or something like that didn't because of all that. So I hope that you're able to string some things together soon and maybe find places that can support not only, letting you do your art, but who have been good on this issue through this. And it's starting to come back alive in some places. So I hope that you can, I hope you can put something together soon. And even though I'm not a big fan of the genre, I'll have to come out and see you if you come anywhere near Knoxville. So.
Oh yeah, 100%. I'd love to have you out of the show.
If
you ever see someone out there, you definitely are welcome.
Okay, I'll have to wear earplugs because I'm already have lost a lot of my hearing. But all right, let's before we go, in addition to your own music, which I'll have links to that on the show notes page, what else are you listening to that is fun and that you think that your fans would really get into?
Well, recently I've been listening to a lot of Chet Atkins.
Yep. He is from Maynardville, which I live north of Knoxville, and the next town up is Maynardville. So
awesome.
15 minutes that way is from Chet Atkins' hometown.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Rad. Yeah. I love
tell people who he is for those who don't know.
Well, he's a super sick guitarist, and he's doing it all before heavy distortion and stuff, absolutely shredding on a 6-string.
Yep.
And my other guitar player, Reese, in Havok, Reese Scruggs, he told me a lot about Chet Atkins that I didn't know. He was one of the OG recording guys in Nashville. Everybody would call up Chet Atkins to get him to play guitar on their recordings because he's just a total beast.
Yep.
But yeah, super shredder guitarist.
And he actually produced a lot. He became, from a session guy, he ended up he probably made more money as a producer in his career than he did as a musician, which is just shows you how respected he got to be in Nashville.
Yeah, he's a total badass. Been listening to a lot of Chet Atkins. Actually listening to a lot of old Michael Jackson. The Dangerous album. I threw that on a few times last week.
He actually had some pretty hardcore guitar players on some of that stuff, right? Who I can't quite remember. Luke Cather. Oh yeah.
Slash played with him. Eddie Van Halen played with him.
Okay.
Had a ton of badasses play guitar for him.
Yeah.
It's Michael Jackson. He could get the best of anything that he was looking for.
Yeah, unfortunately.
Yeah.
We won't go there. Yeah.
Wise.
Yeah, let's stick to music. Yeah. It's a shame that all that other stuff, because he was a great musician, and unfortunately, I stick to the good stuff, listen to the good stuff about him, and pray for the other stuff, I guess.
Yeah, and even the other stuff I have sincere doubts about, just because the same people that accused him of that stuff also said it didn't happen under oath. So
you know what? You're right. I shouldn't.
My opinion is that maybe I could see it happening. I could also see it going the other way. I don't know.
Yeah.
But this out of the other, the music's great. The Dangerous album is the one I was really listening to a lot.
Okay.
It's got the Free Willy song on it. It's got Do You Remember the Time? It's got some good stuff on there. But and then the other thing that I've been checking out that's a more recent musical artist is the Fearless Flyers.
Oh.
They're like an instrumental funk band. It's dudes from the band of Wolfpack, and they play just instrumental funk that's really stripped down, lo-fi, but very tight. Excellent musicianship. And it's just, I think the drummer, it's so lo-fi, I think the drummer literally only has a kick, a snare, and a hi-hat.
Okay.
He has any cymbals or any toms. He might have a tom. But super stripped down, really cool instrumental funk music that's pretty rock and roll for funk.
Okay, yeah.
That's what I've been getting into lately. They just released some new music, so check
All right.
that.
I'll check it out, and like I say, I'll get with you to make sure I link to the right places for your stuff, and we'll keep you updated on the. I think they're going to call it Decriminalize Colorado. I think they're going to try to, and if I'm wrong on that, if it doesn't happen, I'm sorry, but I'm pretty sure Michael Heiss said that was going to happen. So maybe Yeah, I'm sure they'll need musicians and stuff like that to help put that across. So,
oh yeah, 100%. I'm absolutely into that. Keep me posted about that. I would like to know, because if there's anything I can do to help nature be legalized,
yep,
I'm absolutely into it.
Yeah, I know Angela is a big. I see. Yeah. Angela is really big into your music, and a lot of Mises Caucus people are into metal, and your kind of metal in particular, I think. So this will be a big thrill for them, and I've actually really enjoyed it, and we'll be in touch. And like I say, I really hope to see you out on the road at some point soon.
Hell yeah, me too. Thanks a lot for having me, Aaron. This was a pleasure.
There you have it. I'd like to thank David Sanchez for his time and wisdom. Links to some of David's work with Havok and to his podcast, Riffs or Die, are up at the show notes page, decentralizedrevolution.com/72. Thanks to Dave vs. Goliath for all the music you hear on Decentralized Revolution. And thanks to everyone who subscribes to our email list and gives to Mises PAC at takehumanaction.com. And to everyone who shares, rates, reviews, and subscribes to Decentralized Revolution. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.